give more context and information on some of the things that I said in recent videos talking about Qigong and talking about healing. And basically, it comes down to understanding the conceptual model that really underlies those things, and basically why I said the things that I said and how it's actually a lot more simple and straightforward than a lot of people think. And it comes down to really understanding the five phases or the five pulses or the five basic movements of qi in the body, basically. And a lot of people commonly know this as the five elements, but understanding it like in the context of five elements, I think is not really that useful and kind of leads people in the wrong direction. It's easy to think, oh, it's because of wood and because of water and because of things found in nature, and maybe it's like the Western idea of the elements, when in reality, none of those things are true. It's not necessarily how they were even discovered or formulated. Basically, it's just something that was kind of codified and put together so that the absolute layman and an absolute farmer could understand it. So hence it's in more or less agricultural terms. So because of that, there's a lot that's left on the table, and there's a lot that's missed, and a lot that is actually not that useful, for example. So understanding it more so, five phases, five pulses, five basic movements of chi is a lot more accurate, a lot more useful as it pertains to actually healing the body or understanding different processes. So basically, it just comes down to the five phases being up, down, in, out, and then kind of a central stabilizing force that it's all kind of based on. Because without a central stabilizing force, like without a container, there's kind of nothing. So earth, to use the elemental context or the elemental phrasing, earth would obviously be the central stabilizing force. And then from there, up, down, in, out. Pretty much it. And you can understand quite a lot of things just from that basic framework. So especially as it relates to Qigong or something, more or less the movements should be working on one or more of those five things. And if they aren't, it's probably a derivative or probably something that might be hyper specific on something, sure, some kind of acute, specialized thing to develop a certain thing, of course. But in general, it really comes down to that, that basic thing of up, down, in, out, and then a central stabilizing force. So basically, to give you an example to illustrate kind of what I'm talking about here, and to give more context on perhaps some of the opinions that I have on many different modalities and things that I say is basically, let's say we have something like anxiety, insomnia, constant thinking, um, things of that nature, right? Or being kind of over in a hyperactive kind of emotional state. And usually those things kind of go together. Usually, if you're really overthinking and you're really kind of stressed, you're probably having some emotional thing. If you're having an emotional thing, it probably is related to that as well, especially in terms of things that are chronic and last for a long period of time and really imbalance and destabilize people. So basically, we could pretty simply understand that as just too much chi rising. So, in a purely physiological sense, more or less the tissues, the fluid flows, the whole overall structure of the body is set up to facilitate that process. And that is more or less what's happening. So things aren't able to descend and drop down through the body as they're able to, in the very simplest terms. Because at least as it pertains to healing and the body, the word qi often just refers to, well, especially in terms of acupuncture, the word qi isn't really like energy or mystical or crazy stuff that people think. It's actually more so just the organ process or the process that that organ initiates in the body and the elemental phase or pulse of energy that it has. So, for example, wood element would be obviously kind of out. That elemental pulse is pretty much out, right? So if that gets stuck, so like liver chi stagnation and frustration, it's like that stuff is kind of just stuck. It's not necessarily able to fully go out, or it's just completely stuck going out. And we're stuck in that state. We're kind of tight and rigid because the the function or the effect of anger and frustration is it really does kind of tighten up the body and has a predictable effect on the body and a predictable conditioning that it has, especially over a long period of time, which more so comes back to do with the pulse. Whereas you get things to actually come back down and in and sync, then some of that stuff can actually start to resolve and the liver can kind of relax. So just that's kind of an important context because it's easy for people to think chi means the same thing across every single context, which it absolutely doesn't. There are, of course, contexts where it does mean some kind of mystical, otherworldly energy, but most contexts it does not mean that whatsoever. It means something a lot more practical and grounded. So getting back to our example, too much chi rising up, so anxiety, insomnia, constant thinking, and really extreme examples could be like paranoia, um, like delusions, and a lot of psychological imbalances basically on that extreme. So let's say someone has that and they're like, oh, I'm going to get into cold plunging. I'm going to get into doing psychedelics. I'm going to get into doing positive affirmations and going to therapy and, really trying to work with all this stuff. And then maybe really get into conspiracy theories and getting addicted to the news and far out kind of stuff like that. Or maybe they're just going to slam a bunch of supplements. So the reality is that those things are all addressing symptoms and not systems, and not even acknowledging the actual root cause, which is the upward thing, and the fact that the tissues and the fluid flow and the overall structure and the overall process of the body is that way. Because oftentimes when people have those symptoms like anxiety, insomnia, constant thinking, they usually have kind of tightness up here. Their neck and shoulders are usually quite tight, and they usually have a lot of digestive issues as well. And you can oftentimes really hear it in their voice too. They have a lot of constriction around this area, which is exactly what I'm talking about. The tissues, the actual physiological things are constricted and holding things kind of up. But the thing is, when that becomes normalized, so that's your new normal. So everything you do just reaffirms that kind of pattern. So kind of getting back to my example again, what I'm saying is that negative process will most likely continue. And there might be some improvements, of course, from doing all the different things that I talked about and who knows what else. But it ends up becoming like a game of whack-a-mole, or it ends up becoming even worse where you become kind of a devotee of the thing, where you think, oh, I'm doing this thing and I felt some stimulation, so it must be working. So I have to just go all in because I can't possibly admit that it's not working or it's not doing what I think it should do, which is another layer of self-deception, basically. So that's kind of my underlying rationale for a lot of things that I've said recently and a lot of things that I've pointed out, is that basically cold plunges, psychedelics, positive affirmations are just going to keep sending things up. Because what happens when you do a cold plunge is it stimulates your fight or flight response. So you get a lot more cortisol and other stress hormones. So that's obviously upward. Let's say you do psychedelics, so you get tons of up stimulation for your nervous system up here. That's upwards. Positive affirmations, more hyperthinking, tons of conspiracy theories or crazy alternative ideas, whatever else, whether that's spirituality or political things or whatever, still up. So none of those things will actually address the actual root thing or provide the down and in function to sort out the underlying imbalance. So hopefully that makes sense. And again, we could spend all day coming up with different examples of different patterns, but this is a really common one. That's really easy and really, I'm sure, relates for a lot of people. And you can see why, basically like why I might be critical and have been critical of a lot of different things. So like you have a ton of chi rising, so you're already anxious, you're already constantly thinking, things are already obviously way oriented up here. So you're going to go do therapy, which is more thinking, more emotionalizing, more being stuck up here, which is going to produce more of being stuck up here, which is going to keep you stuck in that more. So it's like it just isn't really even addressing the underlying pattern, because the fact of the matter is that 99.9% of people, probably 99.9% repeating, basically themselves are living in a state of that chi pattern, because that's just that's the modern world we live in, basically. That's the normality. I mean, most of us live in stress response And that's where we spend our reality the vast majority of the time. So then basically what people have to offer is some aspect of overthinking or imagination or emotionality, which is what I was being critical of, or maybe pointing out not the best idea in the Qigong video, which is all things of Qi just being rising up and being stuck, which is the opposite of anything useful or that healing or effective on the body, and it's not really building the quality that we probably want. But I guess on the bright side, good herbalism, good acupuncture, and legitimate qigong is designed to address these specific processes because it's kind of one and the same thing. Meaning, like, this is how we see the body. So obviously, because we see the body in this way, we want our modalities to address the things. This is also why I'm often critical of, or not critical, but often like, look, you're trying to put a square peg in a round hole. You have this understanding of the body that's completely divorced from reality, or is so completely mechanistic that you're going to try to do this alternative thing, but these things don't match. So the efficacy, the potency is going to be extremely low. And, as someone who lives in a city where there's multiple Chinese medicine schools, and I've met hundreds and hundreds of medical practitioners, I see the vast majority of them are stuck in this same Pandora's box where their actual experience of reality, their actual understanding of the world does not match in any way, shape, or form the type of practice or medicine that they're doing. So there's obviously a huge disconnect there. So they're trying to fill in the blanks with all these different things. Like, oh, I'm going to bring in some shamanism, bring in some soul regression, some past life regression, some psychedelic therapy, some trauma integration, some who knows whatever other stuff, basically overthinking, imagination, and some degree of emotionality, trying to fill in the blank, when in the reality it's completely unnecessary. But the reason why it's occurring is because their actual experience of reality as a human being in a real, legitimate, tangible way does not match what they're trying to do and the effects they're trying to have. So it's like if someone whose chi is completely dispersed, or not completely, because they'd be dead, but so is really dispersed, not really activated, not really gathered, and really just kind of shooting up, what do they have to offer other people? Pretty much what they have. Obviously there's a bit more. I'm oversimplifying it to a large degree. There's, of course, rapport and empathy and basic human stuff. But ultimately, that's not really the medicine. It's not necessarily sinking chi down and in, although actually it can, if you think about it, because, a good hug or a good kiss, I'm sure we've all felt that, from someone we really care about, can have this sort of effect, which is in some way getting things to sink and release. So that's, I guess, at least one tangible example to try to end on a more positive note. So anyways, hopefully that makes sense and is helpful, and it provides a lot of context, or I guess some context, for many of the things that I say and why I say them. So hopefully that is helpful, and I'll talk to you soon.